So we start a new unit today on classifying triangles and triangle congruence, and the first section is on classifying them. Most of this should be review, so let's just get to it. Let's just remember that the definition of a triangle is a polygon with 3 sides. An acute triangle is a triangle with 3 acute angles. There are 2 ways to classify triangles. One is by sides and one is by angles. And right now we're looking at classifying by angles. In a minute we will look at classifying by sides. Equiangular means 3 congruent acute angles. A right angle is a triangle with 1 right angle, and an obtuse triangle is a triangle with 1 obtuse angle. So when I classify a triangle, the first thing I will do is classify it by angles. Next will be sides. I would draw these. Those are 3 acute angles, but if I don't mark them, not necessarily congruent. In an equiangular, all 3 are congruent. And I think if you've figured it out, that means all 3 have to be 60 degrees. A triangle with 1 right angle, and a triangle with an obtuse angle. With the obtuse angle being right here. So now let's classify by sides. An equilateral triangle is a triangle with 3 congruent sides. An isosceles triangle is a triangle with 2 congruent sides. And last, a scalene is a triangle with no congruent sides. They would be drawn and labeled like this. An equilateral, congruent, congruent, congruent. Isosceles, congruent. Scalene, no congruent sides. Let's talk about classifying these triangles. We have 3 triangles here. Let's see if you can find them first. I have triangle ABD. I have triangle, can't write tonight, BCD. I also have triangle ADC. So don't forget about this third triangle, the big one. I have the small one and the small one, but together they make a big one. So if we were to look at this angle, this triangle right here, I see it's a right triangle. Okay, so I can say that ABD is a right triangle. But if inside a triangle has to add up to 180, then that corner has to be 20. I also see that this is a right angle because I have a linear pair right here. They have to add up to 180, so if one is 90, the other is 90, which means what's left up here is 5, because 90 and 85 and 5 gives me 180. So, triangle BCD, this guy right here, also has a right angle, and these are acute, so 1 right angle means this is a right triangle. And if we now look at the big one, ADC, we have 70 in this corner, we have 25 in this corner, we have an 85 here. They are all less than 90 degrees, so triangle ADC would have to be an acute triangle. Triangle ABF is an isosceles triangle. The vertex angle is B. What does that mean? If this is the vertex angle, it means that it's the top of the triangle, which means this side and this side are congruent. In an isosceles triangle, it also would mean that this angle and this angle are congruent. Let's look at one more problem. So AB is 17x minus 10, FB is negative 3x plus 70, and AF is 10x plus 15. I want to find AF. Well, I can't really find AF yet because I don't have any idea what x is. I do know that AB and FB are equal each other. So AB and FB equal each other. And I'm going to solve this. I'm going to add 3x to this side. And I'm going to add 10 to the other side. And I'm going to divide by 20. Now if I want to know what AB is, or AF, sorry, AF is 10x plus 15, or 55. Now let's look at your graphic organizer. So let's give colors first for an acute angle. Let's do red. For a right angle, let's do blue. And for an obtuse angle, let's do green. And then for congruent sides, let's go ahead and do purple. So we have many different kinds of triangles, as you can see here. And let's just look at this first triangle right here. We're looking at an acute scalene triangle, which means all three of these angles are acute. But none of these sides are congruent. So we're going to give them each a different color. So this side is not congruent to this side, which is also not congruent to this side. What about an acute isosceles triangle? Well, what that means is all three of these angles are acute, and then isosceles means two are congruent. So this side would be this side. But don't confuse that, because this side is definitely not congruent. Last one, equilateral, all three congruent sides. So again, we know that all three of these are acute angles. And we also know that all three of those sides are congruent. Moving down to right. Right triangle always has one right angle and two acute angles. The reason for that is because if I have a 90 degrees here, then these two have to add up to 90 to give me my total of 180. 90 plus 90 gives me 180. Well, I can't have 90, 90, and 0 because I wouldn't have an angle over here. So 90, 89, and 1, both of these would be acute angles. So I know I have a right angle right here and right here in this other one. Scalene, again, means that none of them are congruent. So this side would be different than the yellow side, which will also be different than the brown side. But when we hop over here to the isosceles right triangle, I know that there are two sides that are congruent and then one side that isn't. Let's now finish with obtuse and acute angles. So we know that in an obtuse triangle, there is one obtuse angle, and that would be here and here, and that the other two angles have to be acute. And in obtuse, this first column is scalene, which means that none of the sides match, or none of the sides are congruent. So all three of these sides would be different. In an obtuse triangle that is isosceles, we would have two sides that are congruent. And one side that isn't congruent. And you cannot have an obtuse equiangular triangle. Last one, equiangular. So equiangular, you cannot have a scalene. You must either have an isosceles or an equiangular equilateral. So this guy right here is equiangular isosceles. This guy right here is equiangular equilateral. And we know that no matter what, we are equiangular. And that means they all have to be acute. So all of these in here would be acute angles. And we know in an isosceles triangle, we have two sides that are congruent. Doesn't matter which two. And a third that is not. It does matter which two. I'm going to take that back. You will be told which two. I just want to make sure that you know that an isosceles triangle doesn't always have to have these two sides congruent. They could be these two sides congruent. It just depends on what they tell you. The other thing I want to make sure you know is the red dots, how we're coloring these, does not indicate that these are congruent angles. It just indicates that they are all acute angles. And in our last example, an equiangular that is also equilateral, we know that all three of those sides would be congruent. So all three sides and all three angles. And in this case, don't forget what that means is all of these angles are 60 degrees.